He joins us now from Adelaide. Ian, good morning. Let's take a look at the figures. The largest single group of Australians on Newstart, those over 55. Do you think most people would be surprised to hear the number is that high?
Well, we've been saying it quite a bit. We recently did a story on Today Tonight about it, and I hope the message is getting out there. But more importantly, I hope the message is getting through to government, because you don't have to look too far to find someone who'll tell you their story. And while they're on Newstart and they're over 55, they now have to wait until they're 66 to get a pension, or 67 because it's going to be pushed out, and they're chewing up their savings. They can't live on Newstart. If they're paying a mortgage, in many cases they're actually going after their own superannuation and using that to pay off some of the mortgage. I recently spoke to a person who was 61 when they lost their job. They were made redundant, and that happens a lot as well, targeted redundancies. And then they chewed up their super, and they spent years trying to get another job, and eventually went on the pension. So it doesn't make good economic sense what the government's doing, which is ignoring this problem, and it is a giant elephant in the room. And I can tell you right now, we've got a sluggish economy at the moment. I think it's time for the government to actually take some action and start creating jobs for older Australians, because we do need to get people back into work, not just because it makes financial sense, but also because of the mental health issues involved. If you're out of work for many, many months, in some cases years, that has a huge cost both on physical and mental health. So it is a big issue, and I'm really glad that you're covering it today.
Well, we're talking about people who have a wealth of knowledge, they have a wealth of experience. Why are they finding it so hard to get jobs? We've
got ageism in our society. I was just speaking to someone this morning, and they told me that when they talk to employers, and they're off the record, so to speak, they say, well, why would I employ that bloke? He's 55. I mean, that's what is actually being said. And also, the 55-year-old is now competing against the 35 to 45-year-old age group, and that's actually quite hard, because the employer, in many of them, are in that age group. The employer's in that age group, and they tend to employ like with like. So you've actually got this situation where, when people have been targeted for redundancy, which is very common, both in the public service and in the private sector, when that person loses their job, often the only person that can help them is somebody in their own age group. And if they're out of work as well, that's difficult. We know that a lot of people get jobs because of connections, because of people that will actually help them get a job. And the other thing that's a problem now is a lot of these people who are getting work are not getting a full-time job. If they're between 55 and 66 and they're waiting to go on the pension, often the only work they can get is part-time, and that part-time work's not sufficient. So the government is creating, and I go back to this, creating a problem for itself, because by not assisting these people to get full-time work, they're not topping up their super, they're not even getting super. By the time they get to retirement age, they'll be on the full pension, and therefore the government will have to pay them that. So this is why government has to think beyond just the electoral cycle. They need to think about what's going on in the economy. Now, there's a retirement income review.
Sorry to jump in on you. How, just really quickly, how do they do that? How do they create these jobs? And what is your tip to people who might be looking for a job, just quickly?
Well, for a start, the government could stop having targeted redundancies and pushing people out when they reach a certain age. And I think they need to publish the age profile of their workforce so that we know what people are being picked off, if you like. But look, more importantly, I think we've got to actually have an economy that's working, and I think it's really important. I mean, last month they said, oh, it was great because the unemployment figures changed, but if you've got hundreds of thousands of older Australians out of work for long periods of time, that is a problem. The thing I think we really have to look at is the long-term issues here. Many years ago, we were worried about youth unemployment.
I'm so sorry, we are out of time. It is an important issue. We've seen your tips and we've seen them up on screen there. It is a massive issue, and it's one that we will revisit again. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Well, I hope the Retirement Income Review looks at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Moving on, as the temperature rises, so too does